across the home.
Mike.
Social Security thing.
Not paid to read that up.
No.
Verify. November 12th, City Council be called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We've got dual minutes to take care of tonight, so the first item on the agenda will be approval of the minutes from the October the 14th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes of October 14th, 2019.
Second.
It has been moved and second to approve the minutes from the October the 12th meeting. Would the clerk please call roll?
Adams? Yes. Kahar?
Yes.
Mawat?
Yes.
Shriver?
Yes.
Next item is approval of the minutes from the October the 28th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes from October 28th, 2019.
Second.
It has been moved and second to adopt and approve the minutes from the October the 28th meeting. Would the clerk please call roll?
Adams?
Yes.
Kahar?
Yes.
Mawat?
Yes.
Shriver?
Yes.
Next item will be approve the statement of the bills paid in the amount of $1,185,618.10.
I'll make a motion to approve the statement of bills in the amount of $1,185,618.10.
Second.
It has been moved and second to approve the statement of the bills paid. Would the clerk please
I
call
have a
roll?
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Could we just have a brief explanation of why it's over $1 million?
Certainly. Well, as you see, the biggest one is bond payments for our 2013 and 2015 bond payments represents about $928,000. That's the biggest expense. We do bond payments basically twice a year. Generally, the second payment in the year, the one later in the year, is both interest and principal. So those tend to be larger than the earlier ones in the year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I thought that might get asked.
Yeah. Would the clerk please call roll?
Adams?
Yes.
Kahar?
Yes.
Mawat?
Yes.
Shriver?
Yes.
Next item on the agenda will be requests or comments from the public. There being none, we will now move on to item number 4 on the agenda. The number 5, to consider recommendation of approval of Planning Commission regarding an application to rezone a tract of land located at 1396 South 104th Street from RDNS to R1, and consider ordinance number 1025, finalizing the same.
Mayor, members of the council, as you noticed, I am not Dave Nopick.
No.
Apparently a change in meeting nights, he had other conflicts with another meeting, so I will try to cover this. As you noted, this is a rezoning application. The property is located at 1396 South 104th Street. The request is to rezone from RDNS, which is our residential developed without sewer. So samples would be Castle Lakes, which is immediately to the north, is in that zone. A couple of those other subdivisions where you have 1+ acre lots, they're developed, but they're using the septic system for the sewer, to the R1 residential, which is actually what we would refer to as a down zone. So it's somewhat of a more restrictive in the sense that you're making larger lots. So RDNS is a 1 acre lot, R1 is a 3 acre lot. We did have a public hearing on this item. Well, the original application was on August the 3rd. We held a public hearing, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the date of the public hearing, at our last meeting in October?
October 16th.
16th, thank you. At that meeting, there were a few comments made, but at the end, the Planning Commission did recommend approval unanimously. I think probably the single issue that was raised was just where the use is different between the properties. Obviously, R1 has a little more of an agricultural use than an RDNS, but pretty limited. R1 could, under certain circumstances, allow a horse to be on the property, part of a 4-H type of program. It doesn't allow other types of animals to be on the property. I would say the primary thing that directed this rezoning and the applicants here, in the RDNS, you're limited to an accessory building, total accessory buildings of up to 1,500 square feet. In the R1, you could build a building up to 5,000 square feet. The applicant is interested in building a larger building to keep his tractor. As you know, it's over 12-acre piece of property with other implements, which is really the reason that drove this application. I'm happy to answer questions. The applicant is here. The recommendation of the planning commission is one of approval. And by adopting the ordinance number 1025, you would in fact be accepting the planning commission's recommendation to rezone the property from RDNS to R1.
I have a question. In
Yes.
one of the recommendations that I saw was that they have a public hearing. Was that in addition to the original public hearing?
No. Maybe you can, there is a public hearing requirement, and there was a public hearing held at the planning commission. That is the only public hearing that's required.
Okay, so they're not asking for another public hearing?
No.
And then what were the concerns of the people who came to the public hearing?
The primary one was one about animals or usage, if it would allow like cattle and some other uses that are not allowed in R1. There was some question about the location of the building, which the locations and setbacks are actually the same in those two districts. So it's a minimum of 25 feet and 10% of the front yard width for the side yard setback. So that property, we consider the property line that would be towards 104th Street, because that's the point of access, to be the front. It's roughly 650 feet across there, so they'd have to be 65 feet. The house as it sits today is about 120, 125 feet off the side property line, and the building that would be proposed would be to the south of the house. So it would meet the requirements. Obviously, wherever they decide to put it, that would be the requirement. So there were some questions that it would be up closer to the north property line, which there's basically probably not enough room to put it up there, depending on the size of the building. There was some question about dust from the road. Again, not really a matter of, it's a driveway, it meets all the requirements. So they meet their driveway or it meets the requirements. Those were the primary comments that were made.
And the one other question that I think one other, I made some notes. You said that they could have horses or a horse, but not
Well,
livestock.
horses are regulated in two ways. Number one, by zoning. So in the ag, you know, ag is an ag use. In the R1, you can have certain types of animals when they're associated with a 4-H project and a permit. But under our animal control ordinance, you are limited basically for grazable acreage to 1 horse per acre. I don't believe the applicant has any intent to place horses that have been established, certainly getting to come up, but he doesn't intend to raise livestock on the property. So as different between ag, so in the ag zone, right, you can raise livestock. That,
Sure.
by right, you can do it. In the R1, that is limited by both the zoning and then the animal control ordinance.
Okay, so the main concern is just the building, that's what they're.
I think primarily it was the location of the building, any future buildings, and again, the setback requirements are the same. The size of the building could be larger. He does have, I believe, some existing, and you can correct me, some existing accessory buildings. So he's still capped at the total of 5,000 square feet. He wants to have that in existing buildings and add, or take those away and put in one. That would be his right to do whichever way he selected, but he's still capped at that accessory building max of 5,000 square feet
Do you mind if I,
on the property.
can I speak? Is that okay?
If you'd like to hear from the applicant, that'd be
Okay,
fine,
sure.
yes.
So, yeah, the history on the whole thing was.
State your name and address.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry, David Stroud, 1396 South 104th Street. The driving factor behind all of this is, when we moved on to the 12-acre property, I quickly learned all of the tools that I needed to maintain that property. And so I acquired a tractor with a front-end loader. I've got 3 or 4 different implements for the back, brush hog and stuff like that. And I've also got 4 lawnmowers. And I quickly ran out of space to store these things. So I started looking at the ordinances, what was allowed on the residential non-sewer, and it limits me to 1,500 square feet. And the problem is there's 2 older sheds that are on the property, so that their square footage would cut into that 1,500 square foot. So when I did the math, I wasn't left with a whole lot. So what I wanted to build was, I just wanted to build a 40 by 60 shed, which is just barely over the 1,500 square footage allowed. So that's what started the process. I talked to Mr. Knopick about, what do you call that, a deviation or whatever, it's not right. And he had suggested that the rezoning would probably be more fitting because of the size of the property and everything. So that's where we're at. I don't have any desire to run an ostrich farm or, anything like that. I just need a slightly bigger shed than what they allow. So that's all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael, that 5,000 feet, is that the footprint? So like if you had a barn with a loft in it, the loft would not count in the?
Right, it's the square footage on the ground.
Okay.
Let me just say a little bit, part of the reason we went this route versus a variance is, I know the word variance gets used a lot, but in order for it to be a variance, there's some very specific criteria. And basically, just because it may cost you more or it doesn't work for you on a particular site, doesn't meet the state justifications for variances. I would also note that this property at one point was R1, and when we went through our rezoning, when we created the RDNS and the RDS, which is Seward, this property, because it's set between Castle Lakes, which is RDNS, right, basically 1 acre style lots with septics, and Williamson's Farms, which is RDS, this piece kind of set between it. But if you look at both the uses around there, and if you go to the east, that is R1 property in that area. So it's in keeping with our comp plan. The comp plan basically says this area is going to be, low density residential, so you still have that. As far as if you could ever, under the current zoning, technically, they could rezone, it's 12.15 acres. In theory, you could have about 12 lots in there. Under this zoning, the maximum number of lots would be 4. So if you came back, or somebody came back in the future and said, well, I want to subdivide this up, it limits it to 4 lots. So in some respects, and that's why I talk about a down zone, it really is a down zone because it limits the number of lots that can be built. Most of the time, the request you get is to go the opposite way. Like, I can only build 4 and I want to build 20. So in this case, you're really taking a request to make the property more restrictive in the sense of future density development.
Is ingress egress off of that, is it splitting the property line from 104th Street to the west? Is that?
No, it's actually, there is an access easement to this property, which was existing before this ever occurred. If you look at the general location map, you see where the driveway comes in and literally crosses 2 other properties.
Right.
But that was an existing access easement at the time that the home was built, so
Very
that
close to
occurred prior
close to being landlocked.
Otherwise, yes. He did have to pave that entrance as part of when he built the house, that first 75 feet to meet the requirements at that time.
And then what about the end of 100, is it 150? What about the end of it that's just got rocks at the end of it now?
It will stay the same.
Stay the same?
The right-of-way goes to his property, but as you noted, the pavement stops somewhat
Right.
short. And again, when the house was built, there was some discussion about that access. Had there not been an access easement, we would have probably required that to have been built into a permanent turnaround.
So
in
there's
that
no,
location.
actually, there's no issue then with that
No.
egress from 104.
No, we addressed that some time back. So really, all we're doing here is taking it from the RDNS to the R1, you know, obviously to the west of it, it's basically large area over, you know, in trees, creek, somewhat non-buildable areas. If you had a topo, you can see it drops off from that cleared area down, it starts dropping off pretty rapidly, so.
So is there any danger in the future of that access easement being withdrawn by either one of the property owners that runs through?
No, it's a permanent access, so they can't unilaterally eliminate the access. I mean, it runs with the land, so regardless of who's living there or owns the property, that access runs with the land and it specifically goes to this property. So, unless the property owners all agreed to eliminate it, and the lawyer could probably answer that better, but access easements generally, and this one does, have a statement that it's, you know, in perpetuity and it runs with the land, and that's why you file it.
Well, it's a nice fallback that there's pretty
Right.
easy access to the north,
Yes,
should that ever be needed.
right.
I move to approve the rezoning of tract of land located at 1396 South 104th Street from RDNS to R1 and ordinance number 1025.
Second?
It has been moved and seconded to approve ordinance number 1025. Would the clerk please call roll?
Adams,
Yes.
KR,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes?
Shriver,
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes. Thank you for allowing me to vote.
It is a zoning case.
I know.
Sorry, I forgot
Got
to
the
mention
rare one,
that.
I know, yeah, okay. All right, next item on the agenda, we consider resolution 2019 phase 15, recertifying the 2020 adopted budget.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, as the city manager mentioned in the last meeting, when we got our final county evaluations, I should say, related to the 2020 budget, essentially kept our mill levy at 46.13 mills. And looking at that, we determined that the reason for that was, and this gets into some of the weeds and highlights some of the issues with the process between the city and the county and the state budget forms. When the county gave us their initial estimates for assessed valuations over the summer, they were at about 70 million. We knew that that included the Fastenal valuation, which was about $404,375. In our estimates presented to the city council for our budgeting purposes, we removed that amount. In entering the amounts into the state worksheet, which is a series of equations, we plugged in the original 69,999,988, $70 million assessed valuation figure as required. The final valuations essentially, and we got to the mill levy that the council had approved at that time. The final mill levy assessed by, or given by the county kind of overcorrected for that. And in talking with the county clerk, essentially the fix for that was to recertify the budget at the level that we want. And we can do that because we're not asking for additional funding or additional budget authority than what we had requested. Essentially what we were asking for is an accurate budget authority to what we had requested earlier to give that mill levy decrease that we had planned for in the upcoming budget. It doesn't affect any of the expenditures that we had approved. It doesn't affect any of the expected and estimated revenue that we presented to the council. All this does is correct the mill levy assessed by the county due to the change in valuation from the summer to the fall.
Just to confirm, so that won't cost our taxpayers any more money than we had originally approved?
No, it will pass on the mill levy decrease as approved by the council originally, rather than keeping it flat and potentially offering no decrease at all.
So no action would make the mill levy be where it is today versus the action that we basically wanted that the council approved, which was to decrease the mill levy. So if we don't approve this, there won't be any mill levy reduction.
Right, which is what we had planned for, what all the intro, or the presentation that we gave to you reflected. Again, it highlights that the inefficiencies of the state worksheets to the county and evaluations provided in the middle of the summer, final evaluations given at the end after the budget is approved. So this is kind of a workaround to get to where we wanted to be at as far as property tax revenue.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion, we adopt resolution 2019, adjusting that mill levy to the one that was approved originally.
Second.
Just forgot it's 2019.
It's 2019-15.
Dash 50, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Second.
It's already been seconded, okay. There's been a motion and a second to adopt resolution 2019-15. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Adams,
Yes.
Behar,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes.
Schreiber.
Yes.
Thank you.
Does the, I would have, because the mayor
The mayor
votes on
certified.
budget.
I'm gonna have you all off in there, Dagger, for your vote for the record.
Aye. So do I need to vote?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So I'm gonna go ahead and include
Just
that,
to
but
verify.
at the end of this
Yeah.
meeting, I'm gonna pass out that certification sheet that was originally passed out at the end, to provide that to the county. And just for clarification, the resolution doesn't formalize really pretty much anything, that certification sheet does. The resolution is just attesting that this was brought to your attention and you took the following action to get to that.
So we need you to sign that for you.
And
Next item on the agenda is here a presentation regarding 2019 third quarter budget review.
So this will be our third quarter budget review. We started this earlier this year, and it kind of keeps everybody in that budget mode throughout the year and updates us where we're at.
Do we have a copy for?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's pretty bad. Thought you'd already done it, sorry. One put in Mr. Straight's box.
So just like in the previous presentations, the bulk of this will probably focus on general fund revenues, because those have the most amount of variability built into them from when we originally adopted the budget. So we're gonna go through quarter one through quarter three general fund revenues. And property tax revenues, we're pretty much right on where we're at. 99% is where we are usually at this point in the year, and we are at 99% of budgeted revenues for property taxes. So not a whole lot of surprise in that area. That number includes both property taxes and delinquent property taxes. So again, this far into the year, we don't really have, we've got one more small payment that hits at the end of October and November, which that obviously would be after this quarter, but we're right on point where we expected to be for property taxes. Sales taxes, this is probably the one that's given us the most jitters throughout the year. It was up, it was down for a long time, then it was up, then it normalized, then it went down and up again. The short story for all this is typically we're at 74% of estimated sales tax revenues at this point in the year. Right now, we're at 73% of where we had originally budgeted, but then 75% of where our estimates for when we adopted the 2020 budget. So it's kind of evened out through all the ups and downs. I expect this to be right at our original estimates let's see. When we adopted it was about 1.5 million. I imagine we're going to be right around in that area. Currently, we're at a little over 1.1 million. The 2020 adopted budget estimates puts us right below 1.5 million, so we're probably going to end up right between the high ceiling being where we assumed we would be for estimated when we adopted the 2019 budget, and the low ceiling, or assuming the floor being our estimates for the 2020 budget. So this is the one that's been the hardest to kind of keep our pulse, or read the pulse of, but at the end of the year, I think we're gonna be right on point where we assumed we would be. Now, that means within the sales taxes and the city sales tax, the city use tax, the county sales, and the county use taxes, those have fluctuated. The end result is gonna end up being the same. The two areas that are kind of bounced around the most are county sales taxes are currently performing above where they usually are, but county use taxes are currently performing below where they usually are. So we're probably gonna end up right around where we estimated for city sales, the city use taxes, and then the high end of county sales is gonna probably cancel out the low end of the county use tax. So, short story, thankfully, it looked a little dicey at the beginning of the year and towards the middle of the year, but I think it's gonna level out and we'll be where we expect it to be at.
One of the good things about city sales and use, so when it's the city side and it's on target, that's also where sales tax that we use for, for fire, parks and roads, right, comes only out of the city side of sales and use taxes. So the county doesn't impact it good or bad. So knowing that we're on target with the city taxes is also means we should be on target with the special sales tax.
Did we ever identify why the spike last year?
No, we didn't isolate a single sector of why that happened. And from what in originally looking it up, that seemed to be that spike, whatever it was, seemed to be statewide. And they were, it might have just been people were buying more at in 2018 than they were in 2019 for whatever reason, even though by all measurable indicators, the economy seems to be doing, broadly speaking, better now than it was a year ago. But I mean, this is, sales taxes and sales tax revenue has been kind of a constant area for municipalities to sweat over this year. You've seen, and we shared it with you guys, there's different stories about, well, now they're up this year, now they're historically down from the point, in 5 years previous. So again, I think we're gonna end up, all indicators look like we're gonna end up right at where we budgeted and right at where we're estimating for the 2020 budget. It just was kind of a bumpy ride to get there. Franchise taxes is a little bit of a different story. So as we brought it up earlier, when we adopted the original 2019 budget, the merger between Westar and KCP&L, we didn't really know what the ramifications were going to be of that. And then up until the second quarter, it didn't look like we were going to have too big of an impact. These third quarter payments that have come in through Evergy, I guess is now what the entity is called, that's when we're starting to see the biggest hit in that revenue stream. Now, when we adopted the 2020 budget, we kind of made some assumptions and corrected for it and lowered what we estimated we would get for it. We're still a little bit below that estimate, and there's still we've still got a couple more payments to come in to really get a sense of how this is going to look in 2020 and beyond. But the short story for this being, we're a little bit below average, largely due to if I say largely, almost entirely due to the merger between KCP&L and Westar. Those are where our deficiencies in revenue are showing, not anywhere else in the franchise taxes that we're seeing.
Why would that merger affect it?
And that I'm not exactly sure of. It's a percentage of gross receipts. Now, that's something that we need to do a little bit more research on, how that's affecting us specifically.
There's really a couple things in this graph too. So 2018, remember how it got booked was there was 13 payments that hit that year, so that part. What's happened on Evergy is really two parts. So number one, if you recall, when they did the merger, they lowered the overall rate. Because they said there was efficiency, so the Kansas Corporation Commission, which oversees them, said you have to lower your rate. Well, the first thing that they did is they basically said, well, since we had to refund people for these rates that we charged them, we also went back and effectively said all those franchise fees, we're taking those back too. So they impacted it there, but on a going forward, the gross receipts from rates is less. And so it will be an ongoing moving forward. There is still this question, and I don't know if you, there is still some, I don't know if there's litigation attached to it, certainly some discussion about should the franchise fees have been effectively taken back. They do it in some different ways, but that did impact cities across the state when they did the refund and said, by the way, when we did the refund, we're also, whatever that dollar amount was, we're also gonna reduce your franchise fees to catch that up. And then the rates did go down, and I don't know, in all of the business sectors, but certainly, I think in the residential sector is the biggest one.
I know one city lost $1 million, so it's.
Just off that
There's
refund.
yeah, just from going back and retroactively reducing.
It would be interesting to find out if there's litigation attached to that, to find out if that's something they can
I
actually
don't
do.
know if there is, I got the sense that it was just kind of, they tried to fight it through Corporation Commission, all of that, and that went nowhere. And I know right now, in speaking with other cities, trying to figure out what is their business model. Do we need a franchise specifically with Evergy? You know, there's been conflicting information provided to different cities, so we're just trying to figure out what are you and what agreement do we, get rid of Westar and the other one, we just have Evergy, do we do all three? And they're not very responsive.
Because we have two separate franchise agreements, right? We have one with Westar and one with KCP&L. So which is which, right? I mean, so there's some of that. And mainly what you hear is, if we call and it's something down here, we have to call Legacy Westar, that's what they tell us. And if it's something on the north end, we have to call Legacy KCP&L. So they still are not consolidated from an operational standpoint. So if you need an electric outage truck and it's in the Westar, it's coming from Shawnee. If it's in KCP&L, it's coming from Topeka. I mean, according to, we've talked to them on other things, and that's it. So I think some of this franchise fees, you're seeing some of that. Also, if you think about the weather conditions, right, so I think gas overall, right, I mean, the price of gas, the use of natural gas, right, is not what it was a few years ago when you have, 100 days of, freezing temperatures. We didn't have necessarily a really high, hot summer, so your electric usage is generally off in that sense. We don't receive any franchise from the water side, but you probably are seeing growth in your telecom pieces a little bit, but they're a pretty small percentage of the overall. And it's actually shifting between, right, hard lines, obviously, hardline telephones are still going down, while some of the other services are going up, but some of those services aren't even eligible for franchise, right? Because wireless is, right, I mean, there's no poles, lines, et cetera, then there's no franchise associated. So I think it's somewhat a total change in how franchising is occurring broadly.
And I think that litigation that was referenced was involving communities that essentially got a bill from Evergy to pay back those franchise taxes. Luckily, we weren't among those communities that got a bill to pay back that money. It's just because the overall rate has gone down, and then both the KCP&L and the Westar franchise agreement are both 3% of gross revenue. But because their rates for the customers went down, that affects the revenue stream to the city. So
Both agreements are the same percentage?
I believe so, yes, yeah.
The question is, should it be that
Right.
amount, right? It's not in keeping with our other franchise agreement. The other thing is, I believe, and I may be wrong, I don't know, maybe Sean or is typically what happens is the franchise, so because we have the street lights in our city are predominantly owned by the utility companies. So partially what they do is they apply your franchise fee against what you owe on street lights. So they offset that, right? So you actually could have also the impact on the cost side of street lights. We'll just have to watch that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Gaming revenue, this is a little bit similar to the franchise fee discussion in that in 2018, we had a in the calendar year 2018, we had a pretty good return for our gaming revenue, and that happened in the fourth quarter because they gave us 13 allocations rather than 12 monthly allocations. So that's why that average is, 2018 is peaks a little bit higher. This year, we figured this out, and so this year we will likely only have 11 allocations, so it's going to be a little bit smaller than what we're used to. But again, we budgeted for that. Typically, we're at 74% of the total estimated adopted revenue. We are 72% of our 2020 estimate. So, we're going to be within 1.5% to 2% of final revenue in the gaming in the gaming area. So, the only thing to keep an eye on is that hopefully they get their timing of their allocations right in 2020, and we get one allocation a month like we're used to. That makes it easier. Court fines, we're doing, I guess we keep pulling them over and they keep paying their fines. So this has been the last 2 years really has been pretty strong. The way we budget for court fines, because it's kind of a moving target, and there's a lot of variables built into it, whether it's officers on the road, people's ability to pay, size of dockets. So the way we come up with a revenue estimate is we take a rolling average for the last 5 years. The last 2 years, or excuse me, this year in 2018 have been performing above that average. Typically we're at 74% of our final revenue at this point in the year. Right now we're at 96% of where we originally budgeted with 3 more months to go, and then 84% of our most recent estimates. So we're probably going to exceed our most recent estimates in the court fine area. Ambulance fees, we brought this up before, that some of the external factors, whether it be on the healthcare side or whether it be on the care that folks are receiving actually in town, that are resulting in less calls for service, is having an effect. That's all good things. I shouldn't say all good things, but the fact that people are getting better care at the facilities that we have in town, that may result in less calls for service, that's a good thing. But the negative to that as far as a operational standpoint is the revenue for this area is down, especially from the high point in 2017. We are, about 8% below, our current estimates were about 8% below where we typically are at this point in the year. But it's one of those areas that has a lot of variables built into it, and I think we're probably going to start leveling out at this area. So we're at 2020, for the 2020 budget, we had estimated about $170,000 in ambulance fees revenue from that area. We're probably going to keep going forward unless, we can sense something is changing, externally. That's probably where we can expect ambulance fees to level out. I mean, we had the service for, not too terribly long, so we don't have a whole lot of data to fall back on, but this is around the time where we start to see those trends and things, we've got the data we can carry forward. So I expect that revenue for ambulance is going to be a little bit lower than what we anticipated, but the silver lining is I think it's at a point where it's going to be stable going forward and it won't be as moving hard.
So is this consistent with the number of calls we're making, or is the number of calls continuing to
And Chief could probably fill that in, but I believe our volume is down this year.
Our volume is down by about 90 calls so far this year. But what we're also seeing is a change in the payer mix. And then Kansas legislative body did not approve some recommendations for Medicaid and Medicare expansion for payments. So our call numbers are down from our private payers, and they're staying the same as what our public funded health insurance plans were, which we know if we transport somebody from Medicare, we're getting $187. That's it, no more negotiating. And then $340 or so for a Blue Cross Blue Shield Medicaid person. But like I said, we're down slightly on our run number. The problem that we're seeing is a bigger mix of uninsured that we're putting into set off that are disappearing, and they're not making enough to file taxes, so there's not enough to capture
Motor vehicle taxes, we're performing above the average. At this point in the year, we're above where we had budgeted, but a little bit below where we are at 2020 had estimated. I think that's more of a timing of when the payments are coming in. This is another one where I expect us to be at the high end of in between the 149,000 that we budgeted and the 170,000 that our estimates called for. So not a whole lot to report on motor vehicle taxes. Overall general fund revenues, they look like that. So on average, we're at about 85% of the total final. So the orange figures are actually audited. That green one is the budgeted figure, because obviously we don't have year-end finals for 2019. We're at, like I said, normally we're at 85% of what our final revenues end up being. Right now, we're at 84% of what our original adopted estimates were. And again, that's for some of those factors that I brought up in the franchise fee area and the ambulance area. Those are probably the two biggest chunks of the revenue that are affecting it. But again, it's a 1% variability, and we've got 3 months more of revenue to collect. So I expect us to be, pretty dang close to where we had both originally budgeted at around this time last year for year-end in 2019, and then even closer with once we factor in our 2020 estimates. Now to general fund expenses. This is a larger, just an overall, so we're not diving too far into the weeds, but the short story, and that second bullet should actually Q1 to Q3, but we're usually at 76% of our final expenditure levels at the end of the year. Right now, we're a little bit ahead of that, and some of that is probably due, in looking at it, some of the staffing changes and staffing decisions, I should say, in the public safety departments. But again, this is not, we're not breaking the bell curve or anything at 78 versus 76%. I don't expect that we're going to be too surprised. We don't really have a lot of large purchases left in the general fund for the last 3 months. So again, I think that's, it may be a little bit higher than what we anticipated, but not a whole lot, and it's not outside the realm of what's normal. Other funds, revenue and expenses, debt service fund. Again, this is Q1 through Q3, so it's not going to show a lot of things like the principal and interest payments. Those are typically made in the fourth quarter. That's why our expenditure line is so low as far as the revenue goes. We've also not, also on the expenditure side, we've also not made transfers to the sewer fund, special highway fund, or by the end of September, receive bond proceeds. So the most recent full packet that you got at the end of October, I think actually has some of those figures built into them, if you want to reference that, but that's where the debt service fund stands at this point.
Just would note, when you see the revenue and expenditure numbers for the budget, recall that those numbers are somewhat inflated because of the refunding, the refinancing that we did. So you actually are showing revenue coming in and money going back out on the refund. So we had temporary notes of roughly $1 million. So when we sold the permanent bonds, you got the $1 million, and then you turn around and sell $1 million to pay off the temporary note, and now it becomes long-term debt. So that skews, anytime we do bond financing, you get some skewing of the numbers because it comes in and out, and then of course your cost to issuance bonds, again, while it's paid for out of the bond proceeds, you still have to have some place to show it, so it shows up over here on the expenditure side.
For special sales tax, as we mentioned earlier, because we are pretty close on our city sales tax estimate overall, we're pretty close on our what we think our final revenue is going to be for the special sales tax fund. Q1 through Q3 revenue is a little bit inflated due to the funds coming in for some of the fire department purchases. Those were essentially in and out for that. What's left to pay in as far as the expenditures go, we've got the WSU still needs to be the parks plan. So council's going to be actually hearing that hopefully at their next meeting to consider a final draft from there. I've also got expenditures related to street maintenance and capital outlay in the public works area that still need to be determined, but will likely end up right on point as far as expenditures go for the special sales tax. Special highway, at this point, the only thing that's left in the, as far as the big item, I should say, for expenditures in the fourth quarter would be transfer to debt for special highway, which is currently budgeted at $125,000, and then capital outlay at $25,000. We kind of, depending on how some of the street maintenance projects go and what we've got going on, we kind of mix and match the revenue stream for some of those projects. So at the end of the year, probably when we get to be doing the budget amendment, the final budget amendment at the first meeting in December, you're going to see where a lot of those funds are going to end up for 2019. Economic development, that the spike in the revenue was due to that $291,000 transfer in, which was related to, I think, the purchase of the revenue in and the purchase of the north parcel.
Well, I think it's probably more due to, we use funds from the economic development fund to pay for the highway for 110th Street project,
Mhm.
and then refunded it through bond proceeds. There is some associated with this, but mainly it was like
Yeah,
the highway project.
yeah, excuse me, but that's not a whole lot to report in the economic development fund.
I will say, I think we will probably have on the MWI building that actually is owned by a real estate investment trust. Those bonds, the IRBs, will probably close this year. And so that 1% that's associated with that, and I couldn't tell you what that number is, will likely hit the economic development. That's where we put that 1% comes in. So we anticipate that happening. That comes back to the council for an action, but the last we heard, we were trying to get that. It may push into next year. Kind of move.
The solid waste fund for revenue, this is what's being reported in the reports that you get once a month in your statement of bills paid. The current contract for waste management expires at the end of next year. So in the lead up to that, the admin staff really wants to get a firm handle on how many customers that we actually have and are actually getting service week to week, and then what is the expected revenue from those people with a little bit of delinquency built in. Is in some of our preliminary reviews of some of that revenue item, we get the sense that we're not that we are getting billed for addresses that by waste management that we are not collecting revenue from, or people are just being not paying their bills on time, which is going to affect the timing of how some of these payments show up. We've instituted a couple of changes this year in order to collect that revenue for delinquent payments faster, most notably moving toward a collections service rather than placing things on, especially assessing them to their property, which, we have that. Placing special assessments on these delinquent fines has value in that we're essentially guaranteed to get it, but we incur the cost for the waste management contract in the current budget year, not when we receive delinquent property tax payments, 18 months out. So I think that has helped a little bit. At this point, I'm not overly concerned with the revenue area because it's right in line where we should be at that point in the year, 3 quarters in. I've got my suspicions that once we dig down to the numbers that we should be collecting more, but that also means we should be paying more for aggregates on the expense side. So that's more information to prep you all for that conversation as we get into it in the spring and summer as we start to look at the waste management contract and our options going forward. Not a whole lot to report on the sewer. Revenues are coming in at the rate that we are expected to. The only thing on the expenditure side, we've not made a $65,000 transfer to debt yet. We'll probably do that in the lead up to the budget amendment, and so you'll see those figures at the end of it. 3/4 of the way into the year, and we're at about 70% of where we had assumed we would be as far as paying the treatment contract. So we're within 5% of where our initial estimates thought we would be in that expenditure item to UG for the wastewater agreement. So that's probably pretty good.
If you'll call on that, so when we entered into that agreement, at the time, there was no valid metering system, and so that went in basically first of the year. So now we have valid meters, 2 meter points with meters that we, public works staff, reads on a consistent basis. So we have a lot better data. So some of it, we had to make assumptions as we went on. I don't think we're far off. I think we're pretty good. Again, we were using data from different places that I think it was fair to say that, you know, some of the validity of it, right? So, for example, if you read a meter at the wastewater plant, that's all great, but we know on that force main, there's customers on there that aren't in our city. And if you read it at the lift station, you have flows that haven't been captured. So we knew some of that, even the way it was designed wasn't really designed well for meter regulation. So I think we have a lot better idea of what our actual sewer flows are, which not only from a revenue standpoint will give us a lot better planning information as we move forward, you know, in this long-term kind of sewer management side.
And having that data is going to be, I mean, the fact that we got within, at this point, 5% of what we expected our revenue to be with the, not questionable, but incomplete data that we had at the time, I think speaks highly of the review process that we had at the front end of that contract. And one more thing on the sewer, we may see a good spike before the end of the year, I'm not sure, but it's sewer impact fees.
Oh, yeah. What about them?
Because this doesn't show,
Right.
as it relates to development up north, that's going to have sewer impact fees that the developer pays and ends up in this fund. So there's going to be a little cushion of them in there.
So one of the things we do, anytime there's a new connection, if you remember about a year ago, we implemented to where, so anytime there's a new connection to the sewer system, there's a fee associated with that based on meter size and type. So it's a residential customer, you know, it's a flat rate, $2,500. But when you get something like a hotel with a 3-inch meter, that number is significantly more, right? And the intent of that is you're basically buying into that capacity. So we had to go out and issue debt, build a pipe so big, assuming that in the future somebody's going to connect to it. So when they connect, they're buying into the system. And why we don't segment that then gives us the ability to use those funds to help offset debt payments versus current customers paying all of the debt services. So that's the purpose behind why you do that. I mean, we're not unique, in that, but that's really what the purpose of those connection fees are, is to help offset a portion of the cost of the system.
And with that kind of concludes some of the bigger funds. If you've got questions, if you can't answer them now, then we'll certainly do some digging and get them to you as soon as we can. But there's no action to be taken at this time.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah,
I don't know what
Just
you're.
keep looking.
Oh,
Forward looking.
okay. Okay.
Okay, Mike?
A few items, I've had a few questions about quiet zones, so just give you an update on that. We actually today received from the unified government the documents that we'll need. We've got to get basically temporary construction easements for most of the people along 4th Street. We're not buying necessarily any right-of-way, but because we'll be rebuilding the drive approaches as the curb and gutter gets put in there, we'll have to get easements from them. So we're just starting that process of it. From our city standpoint, we pretty much executed everything we can do in that process. They still have not gotten an agreement with Bonner Springs. I don't know, we're in the process. It's called a right of entry. So basically, we said to them, when you're ready to come do the project, UG and your contractor, you can enter onto our rights of way to do the crossings. And so we executed that some time ago. That's kind of where we're at. They still are waiting for a sign off by the Union Pacific Railroad on the contract document. There wasn't really any comments. It's just, as we've said before, it's the railroad. It takes some, sometimes it's got to go through a lot of processes to get to the signature. So until those two pieces are done, we're kind of setting idle. We'll continue to move forward with what we need to do relative to the 4th Street piece of the project, and they may go bid the overall project, but they can't really do anything until they've got those other two pieces done.
So on the, you said we, when you talked about the temporary right-of-way,
Right.
is that by we, who's we?
Well, we being the city, so the temporary easements, is that what you're referring to? I mean, those are between us and the landowner.
Okay, but we're not paying for those. It's part
well-
of the budget for the,
Some of them we could, so the things that relate to the 4th Street south of the railroad track, yes, those that are, there's really not much to, at the railroad track or north, that really impact. There's one drainage easement up there where we've actually spoken to the property owner and they basically said they would be willing to, I would say, donate the right-of-way in lieu of some other improvements on the property. So that's the plan there.
you're not talking about very significant.
Most of these easements, I mean, in reality, if you ever priced them out, they probably have little or no value. You're generally talking 5 or 10 feet across the front of the property, and again, we'll be putting in the sidewalk and we'll be putting in the drive. So we're really not touching their property other than when you connect, you've got to have that easement or some kind of agreement because we have to get on their property. Otherwise, I mean, there's a small corner plate that we've already talked to a property owner about where just when you got the curb coming around, right now it's a square, you got to be able to figure out how to get the curb in there and some things of that. So there's no major, it's not like we're going to be buying, 20 feet of property or anything like that. So should be fairly negligible in the overall process. We'll probably handle those really internally versus hiring a whole separate right-of-way agent in this case.
So the plan still to hook it up with Newton, all the way to Newton, or?
Yeah, so where the current curb and gutter is that Newton, it's, I get that.
Alleys.
The alley, yeah, whatever.
It is, that's in part
Right,
of the whole.
yeah, so from there north, and that's what we agreed, if you remember, we agreed to make that part of the overall contract, and we would pay for that portion of the cost, and which does include any easements or right-of-way that are necessary. Basically, we've kept the roadway in the right-of-way for the most part, so there's some easement in that area. Just on 110th Street on the Riverview Crossroads project, we did have field checks, so that's kind of there's 3 kind of checkoffs as you go through the KDOT process. That's the first one. So there was no major comments, that's good. We will probably need to come back to the council pretty soon, because as you recall, we authorized the engineers to do that additional work up to field check. And so if we want to move forward and take that all the way through to construction documents, we're going to have to basically amend that agreement. I don't know what that amount is. I wouldn't expect it to be significant. I can tell you based on dollars and cents from what we're getting from the STP funds, plus what we had already expected to put into that project, we're still within that budget even with the additional work. So I think from a budgetary standpoint, we should be able to move forward with that project being expanded farther without having to put additional funds more than what we initially anticipated. So, I think we're in a pretty good place with that and stay on schedule at this point. I'll hold that one. While we're talking about projects, Town Center, if you notice, there's some missing buildings to the north. They say they will be completely done by end of week. I'll be surprised. They're making good, I mean, they're moving along, they're working hard. I think they're, you know, to get everything down and all the pavement out, and then they're certainly gonna have to bring back some soil, so, but they're working hard to get there, but, you know, personally, I think probably end of month is a more realistic, you know, deal. Obviously, we're not gonna be growing any grass out there, so we'll have to be some winter erosion control. You know, thankfully, it's pretty flat land, so it's not like we have big hillsides to work with.
Will it be seeded?
It will be seeded. I'm not sure what they do for winter seeding. Tammy probably knows that stuff better than me, but I mean, they do have to seed and put like straw. I mean, they still have to maintain erosion control until they reach a certain coverage of grass. And so it's likely some of that won't happen until springtime for some final seed. Then audit, we are in process of hiring a new auditor, so we go out for bid. Unfortunately, our current auditor is leaving the audit business for municipalities, as well as a couple other firms. And so we will have a new auditor, we know that. We sent it out, I think, to probably 9 or 10 firms. We got, I think, like 6 or 7 that came back. We've narrowed it down to 2 at this point. We have an interview today with one, I think tomorrow for the other. So we'll be coming back to the council, probably at your meeting on the 25th, is that right? For a recommendation of auditors for the 2019, 20, and 21 years. From pricing standpoint, they're in keeping with what we currently are paying, or maybe slightly less. We do have a single audit this year, so when you get federal funding and you exceed a dollar amount, you have to do what's called a single audit, and so that's a little extra cost, but we were able to basically get the money from the money we got from the federal government for the AFG actually allowed you to use some of those funds to pay for the audit, so I think if that's right. So we actually have the money already for the audit, but obviously the money being 1 year and the expenditures being another, but I think it's like $2,500 for the additional audit, so it's not a significant expense. If you haven't heard, the big boy steam engine is coming through town, I believe, Tuesday, next week. We've been advised that it can create a lot of traffic-related issues because everybody wants to come. They mentioned in, I think, one town in New Mexico where 30,000 people showed up on their roadways. I know that the Highway Patrol and Kansas City, Kansas, and the police agencies and fire agencies have all kind of been put on notice and are working, so you can't really stop people from coming, but we'll, try to make sure it's a safe event. It should be very interesting to see that type of a steam engine come through town.
Is there a time frame?
8:30 to 9 in the morning.
Yeah, and it's coming out of, I think,
Whistle.
out of, it's coming going towards Topeka and going out west. It really ought to be, it's the last, at least what I was saying, be the last time they ever operate this train. So this is its kind of farewell deal, so it's a group of people that have
Yeah, it's come
maintained
through here
this thing.
before, and there's been a lot of traffic caravanning right alongside it.
Right.
I mean, it was all the way out to the cold storage out in the
Yeah.
morning.
Will it be here between 3
Yeah.
and Edwardsville?
Yeah, as you might expect, right, with the railroad tracks right along K32.
How fast does it go? I mean, regular speed or?
Usually it flies through here pretty quick.
But,
You sit out there and freeze to death to watch it go.
It's gonna be nice next week.
Yeah, so, And you know,
It flows this way.
and you know when Zach tells you
The
there's a
weather.
low probability of
Yeah,
rain
no.
in nice weather, you know you can trust him.
Mhm.
Depends
Yeah.
on the weather.
Right.
Yeah.
Keep him at it.
All right, and then the very last thing, Hard Rock Hotel, the permits were picked up today, early this morning. So permits paid, permits picked up. We anticipate they'll start doing the erosion control and site stuff in fairly near future. They haven't given us a date to start on site, but it's paid for, the permit's issued, the plans are picked up, signed off, everything that can be done from our side is done. So, there is a separate permit related to some of they're changing the Village South Parkway because they're moving the entrances, but that's gonna be later in the project, and so it's also ready to go, but it's just a separate permit because that's now a public road, so it's a right-of-way permit versus a separate one. They have to bond it, do all those things, and they don't wanna get a bond for work they're not gonna do till next spring, makes sense. So, I think I have covered all the things I have on my list. I don't know.
Zach, have you got anything?
Just to mention at the next meeting, we will have an update on 1830 South 94th Street. If you remember last meeting, they got a late start on the efforts that were mandated to them, but they are making good faith efforts and they seem to be moving along at a good pace. We'll also have tomorrow, the Parks and Rec Advisory Board is going to be reviewing a draft of the final Parks Master Plan. And if all is looking good and there's not too many different recommendations coming from the board on that, then that should be before the council review at the next meeting as well.
Good, thank you. Chief Mathies.
We've spent the last 90-plus days doing our camera assessment before we made any substantial purchases and trying to figure out how we're going to manage it, how to place it, those sort of things. And we've moved it all about, including at the cemetery. There's no spooks, wandering around. We know that much. So, and there were no vandals either. So we're glad to hear that. But we have purchased a couple more. We've settled on a certain brand, a certain type, with certain features. Added a little more money in some of the storage capacity, and that's where our problem is. We have a lot of traffic in certain areas, and they're very sensitive to that. So we've been really working hard trying to figure out, how do you manage 1,000 pictures of less than a day. So we've done all that kind of stuff, and we're ready to kind of make some more tactical deployments and hopefully get some folks who are throwing out tires and trash and everything else. So, and again, remember those are investigative tools. We don't normally solve crimes. Right? As you see on TV, Channel 5 will play, do you know this person? That's how it works. There's not a great area where we can zoom in and we just get the tag, and if the tag is even right? Those sorts of things. So there's a lot of factors, but the video will help, and it has helped in a couple of situations where we at least got to review and say, no, that's not the car. So that's helped in a couple of occasions. So that's what we're doing. So and lots of other things as well.
Keep putting.
Only thing I really have to discuss is we got tagged for our AFG audit. We knew it was coming because of the amount of money. So December 3rd and 4th, FEMA will be here doing an audit on the regional grant. So, and I will be out of town off and on over the next 2 weeks. So Ben will be running the flagship and at the helm. So.
Thank you. Tammy.
Just an update on 2 projects we currently have going. The Cracksville project's still going. We have a couple of weeks of good weather. We get that wrapped up in about 2.5 weeks, various streets around the city. And also this week we started 102nd Terrace and Edge Hill, that 2019 street maintenance project that we kind of cut in half. We didn't use the other bids for the other, that came in really well. So that project kicked off this week, and that should be wrapped up by the end of next week.
Thank you. Lisa. Margaret, we're going to start with you. You're first.
Boy.
You can't say ditto, right?
I know, usually I write it down and it all gets taken. So. Couple of things. Chief Mathies, so are the cameras put anywhere, or have you been moving them around?
Yes, to both questions.
I just wondered maybe in a time frame to, I guess, see what the effectiveness is. You know, I know.
So some benchmarks.
Pardon me?
So some benchmarks, is that what you're asking about?
Correct.
Right, that's what we've been doing for the last kind of time frame that we had one, but now that we have three total, so we'll be doing some different things. They're movable, and which is a good thing, quite frankly. They're not permanently stationed anywhere. Quite frankly, every 10 days we have to handle them, so.
Because I'm sure calls come in when they're reporting something, so now if there's cameras in place, maybe see, well, it's not happening as much. And
To see if there's a reduction, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah, and
Because like you said, I think, I agree, probably not, they're not caught, but I think maybe it'll reduce the frequency of
well, we hope
what's
so.
going on.
Well, and that's
With the
really
mirror
about
camera sitting there.
somewhat environmental design. So if you think about where something might be dumped, think about those places. Environmentally, they're inviting to it. There's little light, there's a place you can pull off, little opportunity for capture. There are low volume in traffic, and other houses are way off the road. Those are environmental designs that really invite that kind of thing. So we also need to be working on those things, and there's been some, you know, why do we put this sign up and that sort of thing. Well, those signs didn't used to be there, right? Until you figure out that maybe there is or isn't a camera there, that's the key, right? Those signs are environmentally to change it. What we're trying to do is say, well, we know you're doing this, and here's this sign, and quite frankly, in some cases, there was an idea of, well, how far is it to KCK? Is that us or is that them? And we had a place on 94th Street that was always under debate, and we finally solved it just this year, 12 years later, because we've been handling things there for 12 years. So thinking that's, you know, longer than that, quite frankly, but since my time. So what we really have is, we need some crime prevention through environmental design, and that was a piece of that, but we don't have many options. Some of that property is state property and some of this other stuff, and are we gonna put a $40,000 light there? Those are the questions we have to ask. So right now, we're under $1,000 investment and some officer time, and we work with the Public Works to get that stuff policed up as soon as possible. Because what you have is, once it's done and it stays there, it invites more people to do it. It's just say, hey, well, that's a place, you know, kind of like that tire story from KCMO just a few weeks ago. So I don't know, is there's a reduction? We take a case on every time there's a dumping.
Right.
So we will see more or less. We've seen about average, quite frankly, and we'll see less now that we don't have that property in KCK that we've been policing up. It's just barely in kind of around that corner. So, but we hopefully we can do some reductions. But it may become that we need to come back with different strategies to talk about how do we fix those places and maybe just prevent it altogether.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, did we have to do this last year when we had to recertify did we do that last year?
No,
Or is this gonna be an ongoing?
it probably won't be an ongoing thing. The reason for it this year was the timing of the valuations and just what was input into the state worksheets. Normally, whenever the valuations come in the beginning of the summer, we're aware of what's out there as far as possible exemptions go, and we were aware of this one, and this was just a considerable exemption.
Gotcha.
So,
Typically, what happens, so when we issue an IRB, so we do the IRBs, and once the bonds close, then there's paperwork. Basically, exemptions aren't automatic. So we being through our bond counsel, send up to the county, who then sends a recommendation to BODA saying, we recommend this property should be exempt, and here's why it meets all the requirements, right? And then BODA has to actually rule on that and give a case number. So somewhat the timing of those are important. In this particular case, it didn't get processed until around May. And so, because, again, all appraisals are January 1, technically, right? But they send us that preliminary in the 1st of May. And so it was an unusual timing that even though we got the preliminary numbers, but the BODA gave the order saying, yes, the Fastenal project is an exempt project for the 2019 year, that as a result, it fell between the preliminary and the finals. And that just doesn't happen very often. It possibly could happen again, I think we'll figure out a different workaround on the process.
Yeah, there was probably a workaround within the state budget worksheet where we would have had to manipulate the mill levy in anticipation of that exemption being included in the final valuation. So, like Mike said, if this is, the timing of it is not very common, and we are, now we're a little bit more aware of the mechanisms within it to correct it to where we don't have to do. a
We
workaround.
will have a budget amendment, which we do every year. And the only other time we had this, and it's been a long time ago, when Miller Refrigeration, probably in '09 or '10, came back, and we weren't even aware. I will say we get a lot more information now, even now we get how much is in question as far as, so we knew this 400,000 was set. We used to not even be told that, and I'll tell you, I complained a lot about it. I don't know how it finally got into legislation, but typically we know that. But when Miller, that happened that year, we adopted a budget, and all of a sudden there was a multi-million-dollar refund through all the taxing agents. We didn't even know there was a case. And the way we found out is when we got our tax statement, we had a negative number on delinquent tax. And of course, how can we have a negative number, right? I mean, how is a revenue ever a negative? And I said, how is this a negative? And they said, well, because we had this refund. And yeah, you're right, it's not a negative number. We just took it out of your current taxes. Okay, and it was a couple $100,000. And the council voted in that year to basically say to the county, we're gonna hold the mill levy at the level we said we were going to, and we know that it's going to result in less revenue to the city. So it's an intentional action. This particular one, it doesn't impact the revenue. That one, literally, it impacted revenues to the city by council action. More than you probably wanted to know.
Makes sense. Zach, thank you for the budget review. That's very, very helpful, very beneficial. And my last comment or question, Public Works, where do you keep your salt?
On the city park.
Is it covered?
It's covered.
Is it?
Yes.
Didn't we talk about getting something, we're holding off on that, or
It's in the budget, but
in the budget?
yeah.
We're just, they're expecting a lot of,
Now.
not trying to.
Yes, it's been a long-term problem,
Right,
right?
right.
Of salt storage and keeping it dry,
I know
as much as
for the budget.
covered dry,
And
right?
for next year,
With Project Green, it would have been nice to,
Yeah.
at the
Right.
new facility,
Yeah,
build something, but, yeah.
so we were kind of somewhat holding off. So I believe that money, I don't remember if it's in the, it may be in the special, in this special highway fund. Is that where we budgeted? I don't recall.
No, we put the money for the salt dome, I
Yeah.
believe that's in the general fund of the public
Okay,
works budget.
yeah. So, and we didn't put a lot in there, if you remember. I would say we're doing a temporary salt facility versus what you might see like the KDOT, the big ones, right? But
Well,
we're not-
next year's in about 5 or 6 weeks. So.
Yeah. Yes?
That's good. Yes, it is.
Unfortunately, that audit period,
Right.
it's kind of like taxes, right? If you spend it in this year, it's this year. If you spend it next year, it's next year. So if you spend next year's money this year,
Right.
and not that you always have some of that, but
Gotcha.
yes. It would have been nice to have had it done in summer, so that as you're loading up on the salt, you have it covered now, is the challenge.
Gary?
Appreciate the update on the silent crossings.
Yes.
But, that's always one of mine to talk about. Zach, thank you for the work on the budget and so forth. It does make it a lot easier to understand, and that's all I have.
Yeah, Karen?
Well, actually, a lot of this stuff's already been covered, so I'm kind of where Margaret's usually sitting. I am really, probably strangely excited about the cameras. I think that it'll be beneficial, and I'm really glad to hear that you guys are getting even more. In fact, that was on my notes. I was thinking about it after the last meeting, and I thought if you guys don't have enough, then we need to bump that up and support that, for our police department and get extra cameras or put more money there if that's gonna clean up our city. Keeping something clean doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money, but it makes a big difference in our community, and so I'm really glad for that and support that effort. In fact, if we need cameras that you can control online or something like that, so you're not pulling a disc out every 10 days, feel free to bring that, to us to let us know what the options are. I'm really glad to hear about that. I also, the only other thing I have is I wanted to mention, at the chamber event last week, they had a representative from the Rotary Club, and they're gonna have a holiday party December 5th, and it benefits Von Trent. And I got to visit with the Von Trent guy there, and he came in and spoke not too long ago. But they don't just serve Bonner, but anyone that lives in the Edwardsville and Bonner school district area, and so that's benefiting families that live right here in our town. And so I just thought it would be nice to mention and maybe get some Edwardsville people there to support that community event. So that is all I have today.
Thank you, Carol. Chuck?
I was speaking with someone from Lake Quivira, and Waste Management went to the community and actually did an educational seminar on recycling. And I also found out that they also rate every city. They score every city on its effectiveness with recycling. And evidently that's part of their assessment and their fee schedule. So it would be interesting to know what our scoring is on that. So we prepared when we start negotiating, what to expect there. But it also would be interesting if we could get them some kind of public service, if they want to come in and do the same thing, educate our citizens about, the person I was talking to knew about the 7 different plastics, and and they provided a lot of education on, and explained that it's a commodity market, that the prices go up and down, and so really helped. This person thought it was very valuable for the community to hear the presentation and know how it works and how the mechanics of it. And also, from what I gathered, China has loosened up a little bit on what they'll take.
If you recall, when they came forth and wanted the increase, one of our points then was, they talked about the education, we're like, but what have you done? What are you doing? How are you getting this out there? There was somewhat, we'll come back with something, so maybe we just need to remind them.
I think it'd be good for them if our neighbors are getting those services, we deserve those services as well.
Absolutely. We can certainly follow up with it.
Great, thank you.
Zach, thank you. Nothing further to add. We are adjourned.